For 5 years, the night shift paramedic had been the most reliable guy in the department. Jake Martinez, calm under pressure, never rattled by blood or chaos, always knew exactly what to do in a crisis. What his EMT partner didn't know was why someone with Jake's background chose to work the roughest shifts in the worst neighborhoods. Tonight, she was about to find out. Welcome to True Human Tales. Before we continue this intense story of hidden courage and life-saving decisions, tell me in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Metro City Emergency Medical Services ran 24 hours, but night shifts were when real work happened. Between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., calls got darker, more dangerous. Overdoses in condemned buildings, stabbings in alleys, domestic violence where both victim and perpetrator might attack first responders. Most paramedics avoided nights after a few years. Jake Martinez had volunteered from day one 5 years ago and never requested transfer. At 38, Jake was older than most paramedics, with graying temples and steady presence that calmed panicked people. Solidly built, with calloused hands that moved with precision, his uniform was always pressed, equipment maintained, and his resuscitation success rate was legendary. To his colleagues, Jake was the partner you wanted when things went bad. He never panicked, never made adrenaline-fueled mistakes. His resuscitation success rate was legendary throughout the department. Jake never talked about his background before becoming a paramedic. His personnel file listed military service, but he never elaborated. Friendly but private, competent but unknown. Sarah Chen had worked with Jake for 6 months. At 25, she was newer, eager to learn, increasingly curious about Jake's knowledge beyond EMT school, how he assessed trauma scenes instantly, how he stayed calm during shootings, how he knew medication dosages without checking protocols. Sarah suspected Jake's background was more complicated than he let on, but she'd never asked directly. Tonight, she wouldn't need to. The call came at 1:47 a.m. Unconscious male, possible overdose, 1247 Industrial Way, Warehouse District. Sarah groaned, climbing into ambulance 47. The warehouse district was dangerous at night. Abandoned buildings, drug activity. Another overdose, she said, third tonight. Jake started the engine. Probably fentanyl. We'll need multiple Narcan doses ready. They drove through empty streets with emergency lights flashing but siren off, avoiding unnecessary attention. Jake navigated the industrial district with confidence, knowing every street. "Jake," Sarah said as they approached the warehouse complex, "can I ask something?" "Sure." "Where did you learn to handle trauma calls like you do?" "Same training program, but you work like you've been doing this 20 years instead of 5. Jake was quiet, considering his answer as he turned onto Industrial Way. "Experience. Some situations you learn by doing." "What kind of experience?" Before Jake could answer, they arrived at 1247 Industrial Way, and both immediately realized this wasn't routine. The warehouse looked abandoned, but expensive cars were parked around it, sedans and SUVs with tinted windows, positioned like their owners were professional criminals. Jake parked 50 feet from the entrance. His demeanor changed, still calm, but with alertness Sarah had never seen. "Sarah," he said quietly, "stay in the ambulance until I say it's safe." "What?" "We work as a team." "Not tonight." He stepped out, but instead of getting equipment, stood perfectly still for 30 seconds, scanning the area with systematic attention that had nothing to do with overdose victims. That's when the men appeared. 4 men emerged from warehouse shadows, all armed, moving with coordinated precision, not street criminals, professionals who had expected the ambulance. Sarah reached for her radio to call police backup, but Jake caught her eye through the windshield and shook his head. "Don't call yet. Let me handle this." The apparent leader approached Jake with confident stride, used to being obeyed. Well-dressed, probably 40s, with bearing suggesting he'd climbed ranks in a dangerous organization. "You the paramedic?" "I am. You called for medical assistance?" "My boss is inside, hurt bad. You're going to fix him." Jake nodded calmly, as if arm demands were routine. "I'll need to assess the patient and determine treatment. My partner and I need access to equipment." "Your partner stays in the truck. You come alone." Sarah watched with growing alarm. This wasn't protocol for anything. Emergency calls weren't conducted at gunpoint with demands about who could provide care. She reached for her radio again, but Jake's voice stopped her. "Sarah," he called with authority she'd never heard. "Stay with the ambulance. Monitor the radio. Be ready if I call." It wasn't suggestion. It was an order, given with command presence that made people obey without questioning. The armed men escorted Jake toward the warehouse, but Sarah noticed he moved with them rather than being forced. His posture was alert but not fearful, professional but not submissive. He was negotiating, though she couldn't hear what was said. Inside the warehouse, Jake found a command center for criminal operations. Tables with money and drugs, communication equipment, enough weaponry for a small army. But his attention went to the man on a couch, surrounded by panicked associates. The patient was probably 50, expensively dressed, obviously important. Conscious, but barely, pale and clammy, breathing shallow. Gunshot wound to the abdomen had soaked his shirt with blood. Without proper medical intervention, he'd be dead within the hour. "How long has he been like this?" Jake asked, dropping beside the couch and beginning assessment with systematic efficiency that had once kept wounded soldiers alive in Afghanistan. "About 30 minutes. Can you save him?" Jake checked pulse, examined the wound, evaluated condition with practiced speed. The bullet had entered below the ribcage, probably damaging organs, but the man was stable enough for transport if they moved quickly. "He needs surgery. I can stabilize for transport, but he has to reach a trauma center within an hour if you want him to survive. No hospitals, too many questions. Fix him here." Jake looked at the armed men surrounding him. "I'm a paramedic, not a surgeon. I can keep him alive temporarily, but I can't repair internal gunshot damage with ambulance equipment. Then he dies. You die." Jake had heard threats before. In Afghanistan, insurgents made similar demands when his unit treated wounded civilians, where American medics were targets. The difference was that back then he'd had backup, body armor, and weapons. Tonight, he was alone with a first aid kit and 20 years of training these criminals couldn't imagine. "Let me get equipment from the ambulance," Jake said calmly. "I can at least stabilize him while we figure out next steps." 2 gunmen escorted him outside, where Sarah waited with barely concealed panic. "Jake, what's happening?" "Should I call Sarah? I need the trauma kit, 2 saline units, blood pressure cuff, and portable oxygen," Jake interrupted, his voice carrying command authority. But as he gathered equipment, he spoke quietly enough that escorts couldn't hear. "When I go back inside, wait 5 minutes, then call dispatch and request police backup. Tell them multiple armed suspects and request tactical response. Don't approach until backup arrives." "Jake, I'm not leaving you alone with Sarah." He turned to face her directly, and for the first time since she'd known him, Jake Martinez looked like someone other than a paramedic. The man beside their ambulance had the bearing of someone who had given life and death orders before, who had operated where hesitation meant death. 5 minutes, then call backup. That's an order." She nodded, recognizing something in his voice she couldn't identify but didn't dare question. Jake returned to the warehouse with medical equipment, but also carried something else, a small tactical knife concealed in his kit that wasn't standard paramedic equipment, and situational awareness that came from operating in hostile territory where medical personnel were high-value targets. Inside, the patient's condition had deteriorated. Blood pressure dropping, pulse irregular, and the men around him were getting desperate and dangerous. Jake worked with systematic efficiency that had once earned him commendations for battlefield medicine. He started an IV, administered fluids for shock, applied pressure dressings, used every technique to keep the man alive. But while working, Jake assessed the tactical situation with skills having nothing to do with emergency medicine. 8 armed men positioned defensively. Communication equipment suggesting coordination with outside support. This was professional operation with military-level planning. "Is he going to make it?" asked the leader, whose agitation suggested the patient's survival was crucial beyond humanitarian concerns. "Maybe," Jake replied honestly, "but condition is critical. Even if I stabilize temporarily, he needs surgical intervention within 30 minutes, or internal bleeding kills him regardless." That's when Jake heard distant sirens, still faint but getting closer. Sarah had made the call. The warehouse erupted in controlled chaos as criminals realized their situation had changed. Radio chatter, weapons readied, positions taken for impending siege. "You called the cops," the leader shouted, swinging his weapon toward Jake. I didn't call anyone," Jake replied calmly, continuing to work on his patient. "But my partner has protocols. When a paramedic doesn't report within specified time limits, dispatch automatically sends backup. Standard procedure." It was partially true, but not the whole truth. Jake had counted on Sarah following instructions, and now he had to manage the next minutes carefully until tactical teams could resolve the situation. "We're not going down for this. You're our ticket out." "I'm not going anywhere until my patient is stable, and taking a paramedic hostage during police response turns this into federal kidnapping. You want that heat?" Sirens got louder. Through warehouse windows, Jake saw police vehicles arriving. Sarah had done what he'd asked, and professional law enforcement was taking over a deteriorating situation. But Jake knew the next minutes would determine whether everyone walked away or this became national news for wrong reasons. The warehouse leader made tactical decisions, coordinating through hand signals, suggesting military or law enforcement training. They were preparing for siege, not surrender. "Listen," Jake said, continuing patient care while speaking to the room. "I've been in situations like this. You're surrounded by people very good at their jobs, and they won't just let you walk away, but they won't risk civilian casualties if they can avoid it." "What are you saying?" "My patient needs attention I can't provide here, and you need a way out that doesn't end with anyone killed. Maybe we find a solution that works for everybody." Jake had learned negotiation in Afghanistan, where American medics sometimes brokered ceasefires to treat wounded civilians. Same principles. Find common ground, reduce tensions, buy time for rational decisions. The patient suddenly went into cardiac arrest. Heart stopped, breathing ceased, monitors sounding alarms filling the warehouse with urgent beeping. Without hesitation, Jake began CPR. Chest compressions, rescue breathing, full resuscitation protocol. But as he worked, he implemented a plan developing since realizing this situation required more than standard paramedic training. "He's dying," a gunman shouted. "Not if I can help it," Jake replied, continuing compressions while reaching for the defibrillator. But instead of standard AED, Jake pulled out a device that looked similar, but had been modified in ways not immediately obvious. As he prepared to shock the patient's heart, Jake caught the nearest gunman's eye and spoke with calm authority that made people listen even in crisis. "Everyone step back. The defibrillator delivers significant electrical charge, and anyone touching the patient or couch could be seriously injured." The armed men moved away, giving Jake space to work. What they didn't realize was that his device wasn't just a defibrillator, it was a modified tactical unit that could deliver considerably more voltage than necessary for cardiac resuscitation. Jake placed paddles on the patient's chest, but also made contact with the couch's metal frame. When he activated the device, electrical charge didn't just restart the patient's heart, it traveled through the couch frame into concrete floor, creating powerful electromagnetic pulse that disabled every electronic device in the warehouse. Lights out, radios dead, cell phones stopped. The warehouse plunged into darkness, and Jake Martinez, former Army combat medic, was operating in exactly the environment where his specialized training gave him every advantage. In the confusion, Jake moved with silent precision that had once made him one of the most effective combat medics in the 82nd Airborne. He disabled gunmen with techniques not taught in paramedic school, secured weapons, and used warehouse knowledge to position defensively while protecting his patient. By the time emergency power kicked in 3 minutes later, the tactical situation had changed completely. Jake had neutralized 4 of 8 armed men, secured weapons, and established defensive position protecting himself and his patient while providing cover for the police tactical team preparing to enter. When police finally entered, they found Jake Martinez calmly performing CPR on a patient who was alive and stable, while 8 armed criminals lay zip-tied with medical tape around the room, neutralized by someone with considerable tactical expertise. "Paramedic Martinez, are you injured? Is the patient secure?" "Patient stable and ready for transport," Jake replied, never breaking CPR rhythm. "All hostile subjects secured and disarmed, scene safe for medical evacuation." Later, transporting the patient to Metro General, Sarah finally asked the question she'd been building to for 6 months. "Jake, who are you really?" Jake was quiet, monitoring vital signs and adjusting IV rates with precision, suggesting extensive trauma experience. Staff Sergeant Jake Martinez, 82nd Airborne Division, Army Special Operations, he said finally. 3 Afghanistan tours, specialized in combat medicine and emergency trauma in hostile environments. Medically retired after taking shrapnel in Kandahar. Became a civilian paramedic because I wanted to keep saving lives without having to kill people to do it. Sarah stared as pieces fell into place. The way he never panicked under pressure. How he seemed to know things not in textbooks. How he'd handled tonight like he'd been preparing his entire career. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to be Jake the paramedic, not Sergeant Martinez the combat veteran. I wanted to save lives in a world where the biggest crisis was cardiac arrest or car accident, not incoming mortar fire and IEDs. But tonight, those worlds collided, and I had to remember that sometimes saving lives requires more than medical training. The investigation revealed the warehouse was a drug distribution center for international cartel, and Jake's patient was a coordinator whose testimony led to dozens of arrests across 3 states. Jake returned to work the following week to find his heroics had made him legendary in the EMS community, but also that his cover as just another paramedic was permanently blown. Everyone now knew about his military background and specialized training. The department offered promotions, specialized assignments, tactical response opportunities. Jake politely declined them all. I like being a paramedic, he told the chief. I like saving lives. That's what I've always done, and that's what I want to keep doing. But now, Sarah understood why Jake Martinez was the partner everyone wanted on their worst calls. He wasn't just a paramedic with military experience. He was a warrior who had chosen to use skills to heal instead of harm, and who would do whatever necessary to protect people he'd sworn to serve. Jake continued working night shifts in Metro City's worst neighborhoods, but now colleagues knew that the calm, competent paramedic who never got rattled was also someone who could handle situations going far beyond standard medical emergencies. And Sarah Chen, who had started as a rookie trying to learn from an experienced partner, discovered that sometimes the best teachers are those who learned their lessons in places most people never want to go. Because that's what true healers do. They find ways to keep saving lives, even when saving lives means being prepared for situations requiring more than medical training. Sometimes the most powerful medicine is delivered by someone who knows exactly what it costs to keep people alive when everything around them is trying to kill them. This story was brought to you by True Human Tales. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet expertise suggested hidden depths? Tell us about them in the comments below, and let us know what city you're watching from today. If you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, subscribe to support the channel. We honor the guardians who continue serving, one life at a time.